Everyone expected my wedding day to be magical, but no one knew the man trying hardest to ruin it was my own father. He said my fiancé was beneath me just because he didn't come from money. I thought he'd eventually come around. I was wrong. A week before the ceremony, I found out he'd been pulling strings behind my back, trying to sabotage everything. But instead of canceling, I quietly changed everything: the venue, the guest list, even the meaning of that day. And when he found out, it was already too late. My name is Vanessa, and for most of my life, my dad was my hero. He was the kind of father who never missed a dance recital, who cheered the loudest at my graduation, who made me believe I could do anything. Growing up, it was always just the two of us and my mom. We were a small but close-knit family. We didn't have much, but we had love, and honestly, that felt like everything. Things started to shift when I was in high school. My parents' marriage became strained, and by the time I left for college, they had separated. The divorce was civil, at least on paper, but emotionally, it left cracks we couldn't quite see yet. A year later, my dad remarried. Her name was Tanya, and from the moment I met her, something felt off, not because she was younger or flashier or different, but because she made it very clear, without saying a word, that I didn't fit into their new little world. At first I tried. I really did. I smiled at family dinners, called on birthdays, sent polite messages during the holidays. But slowly, my dad began to drift. The man who used to text me every morning started taking days to respond. The father who once bragged about my college essays now barely remembered what I majored in. Tanya was always around, always speaking for both of them. And while she never said it directly, I could feel her disapproval, like my ambitions, my partner, my modest lifestyle. None of it measured up to the standards she'd helped redefine for my dad. Still, I didn't let it ruin me. College had introduced me to someone who saw me for exactly who I was and loved me anyway. His name was Aiden. We met freshman year in an intro to ethics class where we argued so much over Plato's Republic that the professor started pairing us on purpose. Somewhere between debates and study sessions, we fell in love. He was thoughtful, gentle, and sincere, the kind of person who remembered your coffee order after one conversation and stood up for strangers on the subway. We didn't come from the same background. Aiden was raised by a single mom who worked 2 jobs and never let him forget the value of kindness. He didn't have a trust fund, a fancy last name, or the kind of resume that would impress people like Tanya. But he had depth. He had integrity. And after 5 years of building a life together through graduation job hunting, tiny apartments, and late-night grocery runs, I said yes when he proposed on a quiet weekend in the park where we first kissed. Telling my dad should have been a joyful moment. Instead, it was a turning point. We sat across from him at a quiet restaurant. I held Aiden's hand, heart-pounding, ready to share the biggest news of our lives. But when I told him we were engaged, he didn't smile. He didn't congratulate us. He just looked at Aiden cold and calculating and said, "So what's your plan to support my daughter?" It hit like a slap. Aiden handled it with grace, assuring him that we were building something strong and stable together. But my dad wasn't listening. He cut him off, muttering something about ambition and real men, and then he said it the sentence that would replay in my head for months after, "Vanessa, you could do so much better." I laughed, thinking he was joking. He wasn't. From that moment on, it was clear he didn't approve of the wedding, and he had no intention of hiding it. I told myself it was just shock that he needed time. But as the weeks passed, he became more distant. Calls went unanswered, emails ignored. When I sent him a draft of the invitation, he replied with a single sentence: "You're making a mistake." Still, I hoped. I held on to the memory of the man who once braided my hair before school and clapped the loudest when I played a tree in the second grade play. I believed he'd come around, that he'd see how happy I was, that he'd remember how much I'd always wanted him there when I walked down the aisle. We started planning the wedding slowly. Nothing extravagant, a small ceremony in the garden of an old estate outside the city with just close friends and family. My mom cried when I asked her to walk me down the aisle. Aiden's mom offered to help with flowers. It was the kind of wedding built on love, not spectacle. But my dad, he didn't ask how he could help. He didn't offer to contribute. He didn't even RSVP. Then something strange happened. I received a call from the venue coordinator one afternoon saying there were inconsistencies in the event permits. Some paperwork had been tampered with, licenses missing, forms unsigned. It was nothing I recognized, but it was enough to put the whole day at risk. At first, I blamed myself. Maybe I overlooked something. Maybe I got a date wrong. But deep down, something felt off, and I wasn't the only one who thought so. A few days after that strange call from the venue, I received an email that made my stomach drop. It was from the city clerk's office stating that our wedding permit had been flagged due to incomplete or altered documentation. Attached were scans of the forms we'd submitted, and sure enough, someone had tampered with the dates and signatures. At first, I was stunned. Who would do this? Why would anyone want to derail our wedding? I didn't want to believe what my gut was already telling me. But after a tense call with the venue manager who admitted someone had contacted them, claiming to be me, and tried to cancel our reservation, the pieces started falling into place. I called my dad. He picked up on the second ring. "Vanessa," he said like nothing had happened. I kept my voice calm. "Did you contact the venue?" A pause, too long. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said carefully. "You didn't try to cancel our reservation. You didn't mess with the permit paperwork." More silence. Then his voice changed harder now. "Maybe this is a sign you should slow down. Think things through." My hands were shaking. "You tried to sabotage my wedding." "I'm trying to save you from a life of disappointment," he snapped. "You're marrying a man who can't provide for you. You're throwing your future away for some idealistic fantasy." "That man is my partner," I said, my voice breaking. "And this is my choice, not yours." He hung up. I stared at the screen in disbelief. The man who once carried me on his shoulders through the 4th of July parade had just tried to burn down one of the happiest moments of my life, all because he didn't approve of who I loved. When I told Aiden, his reaction crushed me even more. He sat quietly for a long time before finally saying, maybe we should postpone." "Postpone?" I blinked, thinking I misheard. "I just want this to be joyful for you, not stressful, not surrounded by sabotage and drama." My chest tightened. "So he wins?" "No," Aiden said softly. "But I don't want to marry you, with all of this hanging over your head." The next few days were a blur. I called the city office, explained the situation, and tried to refile everything. The staff were kind, but the process would take time. Time we didn't have. The date was 1 week away. My mom was livid when I told her. "That man has lost his mind," she said. "He used to love you more than anything. Now, he's acting like he owns you." Even my friends, some of whom had been excitedly planning bachelorette surprises and floral arrangements, started pulling back, unsure of what was happening, or if the wedding was even still on. I felt completely alone, embarrassed, betrayed. The wedding I had dreamed of was crumbling under the weight of my father's disapproval. And more than anything, I was exhausted, tired of defending my love. tired of fighting for something that should have been a celebration. One night, I sat on the floor of our living room, surrounded by invitation envelopes and wilted mood boards. I looked at a photo of me and my dad from years ago, my first homecoming dance. He'd twirled me in the driveway like I was a princess. How had we gone from that to this? I wanted to scream, to cry, to call off the whole thing and run away with Aiden to a courthouse and get it over with. But then something shifted. I remembered who I was. I wasn't a little girl begging for approval anymore. I was a woman about to marry the love of her life, and I was done letting my father dictate the terms of my happiness. I stood up, brushed off the hurt, and made a decision right then and there. We were still getting married, not just out of spite, but because we deserved it. Because our love had already weathered more storms than most couples face in a decade. Because I wanted to start this new chapter, not with fear, but with clarity. But this time, I was going to do it differently. No more trying to please everyone. No more hoping my dad would change. He had made his stance painfully clear, and I was done begging for a seat at a table that kept pulling away. The next morning, I started calling around. A friend of mine, Lily, was a photographer who'd shot at a small vineyard just outside the city. It was stunning, intimate, and most importantly, available. It wasn't grand, but it was beautiful in the ways that mattered. We wouldn't have the same number of guests, but maybe that was a blessing. I didn't want people there out of obligation. I wanted people who truly supported us, and I already knew one person who wouldn't be getting a new invitation. The days leading up to the wedding were nothing short of chaos, but not in the way you might expect. There were no last-minute fittings or frantic trips to the florist. Instead, there were whispered phone calls, long email threads, and hushed conversations with people I trusted. I was putting together an entirely new wedding in 6 days, and no one outside of a small circle knew. I told Aiden what I was doing, and for a moment, I saw the tension leave his shoulders. "You're really going through with this?" he asked. "Absolutely," I said. "But we're doing it on our terms." We created a new guest list, one with only the people who had been genuinely supportive. Our original 200-person wedding was trimmed to about 40. I didn't send paper invitations. I sent encrypted emails. Each guest was told not to share the details. No posts, no tags, not until it was over. My mom, bless her, offered to help with the logistics. She contacted a local caterer she trusted and got a menu pulled together in 48 hours. Lily, my photographer friend, reached out to a florist she'd worked with before, and the woman delivered exactly what I had envisioned with barely any time to spare. The vineyard was perfect. It had this gentle slope that overlooked rows of grapevines glowing gold in the late summer light. There was a little wooden platform they usually used for wine tastings. That would be our altar. It felt right. Real. Ours. But there was still the matter of my dad, and I knew he wouldn't stay quiet for long. 3 days before the new wedding date, he called. I didn't pick up. He texted, "Dad, I hear you're still going through with this mistake. Dad, you don't want to do this. Dad, if you do, don't expect me to be there." I stared at the messages for a while before replying. "Me? I wasn't expecting you to be." He didn't respond. I thought that was the end of it, that maybe for once he would back off. I was wrong. The next morning I received an email from a distant cousin, someone I hadn't even invited to the original wedding. It was a screenshot of a message my dad had sent out to our extended family. "Vanessa has decided to elope with her boyfriend and cancel the family wedding we were all looking forward to. I'm heartbroken by her decision, and hope you all understand that I'll be distancing myself from this situation. Distancing himself, he was painting himself as the victim, a noble father whose ungrateful daughter had turned her back on tradition. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. Instead, I kept planning. Aiden and I drove out to the vineyard 2 days before the ceremony. We walked the grounds, finalized the setup, and had a quiet moment under the giant oak tree where we would say our vows. That night, we stayed in a small cottage nearby, trying to sleep while my phone buzzed nonstop. Apparently, word had started to leak. A friend had let it slip to her boyfriend, who told his sister, who told her hairdresser. And suddenly, people were texting me, asking if the wedding was still happening, if they were still invited, if it was true I had run off. I ignored them all. We were too close now. The storm was behind us. All that mattered was the moment ahead. The morning of the wedding, the sky was pale blue, and the air was warm with a hint of fall. The florist arrived at dawn and transformed the platform with eucalyptus garlands and white roses. Lily was already snapping photos of everything, the dress, the rings, even the handwritten vows I had scribbled in a notebook the night before. My mom stood by me as I got ready. She zipped up my dress, then looked me in the eye and said, "Your dad made his choice, but so did you, and I'm proud of you." I didn't cry. I thought I might, but I didn't, because I wasn't sad anymore. I was clear. The ceremony was everything we hoped it would be. Small, sweet, full of emotion. We walked out down the aisle together, Aiden and I, hand in hand. There was no traditional father gives away the bride moment. I didn't need to be given away. I had chosen this. I had fought for this. As we exchanged vows, under that oak tree, a breeze kicked up, rustling the leaves above us. It felt like nature itself was leaning in to listen. After we kissed and turned to face our friends and family, the cheers were thunderous. And in that moment, I felt something crack open in my chest. Relief, joy, liberation. The reception was held in the vineyard's tasting room, a cozy barn with fairy lights strung along the beams. We danced, laughed, toasted. There was no drama, just warmth. But of course, the internet never sleeps. That evening, one of our guests posted a photo, just one. It was me and Aiden laughing mid-spin on the dance floor. The caption read, "The most beautiful wedding I've ever attended." Within hours, the image was being reshared. A wedding blog picked it up. Then a regional bridal magazine. The next day, a full write-up appeared online. The wedding of the year, how one couple ditched the drama and found something better. And that, apparently, is how my dad found out. He called, again. This time I answered. He didn't yell, didn't rage. He just said, "You really did it?" "I did," I said. "And you didn't invite me?" "No," I said, "because you didn't want to come. You just wanted control." There was a long silence. Then, in the quietest voice I'd ever heard from him, he asked, "Do I still have a daughter?" I took a breath. "You have a choice." I said, "You can choose to be a father to the woman I am now, not the girl you used to mold. But if you can't do that, then no, you don't." He didn't respond, just hung up. I stood there, phone in hand, feeling strangely at peace. That was the closure I needed. Not dramatic, not loud, just honest. The truth was, this wedding wasn't just about marrying Aiden. It was about reclaiming my life, drawing a line between the past and the future, saying, "This is who I am now. This is what I want, and I don't need your permission." The next day, we left for a short honeymoon in the mountains. No Wi-Fi, no drama, just us. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't looking over my shoulder. I wasn't trying to explain or justify or win anyone over. I was just happy. When we returned from our short honeymoon in the mountains, Aiden and I were still floating on that newlywed cloud. No phones, no emails, no distractions. We were just two people starting a life together without the noise of anyone else's opinions. But that peace didn't last long. I opened my inbox one morning to find over a dozen unread emails. Most were congratulations from extended family and friends who had seen the magazine feature. But a few were more pointed. My Aunt Karen, who had always idolized my dad, sent a passive-aggressive message. "It's a shame your father had to find out from strangers. You broke his heart." And then one subject line caught my eye: legal notice regarding wedding deposit. I opened it confused and discovered my father had attempted to sue me. Apparently, he had placed a deposit on the original venue under his name but included my name on the contract. When I canceled the booking without informing him, he claimed it was a breach of agreement. The letter sent by a lawyer friend of his demanded reimbursement. It would have been laughable if it weren't so deliberate. He wasn't trying to get money. He was trying to maintain control, to punish me for moving on without him. Aiden sat beside me, reading the email. "This is ridiculous. He can't win this." "I know," I said. "But it's not about winning. It's about power. Always has been." So I didn't respond directly to him. Instead, I spoke to someone who knew him better than anyone else, my grandmother. She was 85 sharp as ever, and had been watching this whole circus unfold in silence. When I visited her, she greeted me with a smile, poured tea, and said, "Took him long enough to try legal threats." I was wondering when that would happen. I stared. "You knew he'd do this, honey," she said, sipping her tea. "He's been that way since he was a boy. Always about appearances. Always about control. But he forgets one thing. Control only works if you play along." She reached into a drawer and pulled out a photo album. Inside were pictures of my father when he was young, awkward, shy, always overshadowed by his own father. And there, nestled between yellowing pages, was a letter, dated 1883, addressed to him. "You don't have to repeat the mistakes I made. Love your kids more than your pride." It was from my grandfather, the same man my dad had spent his life trying to emulate. And here, in his own words, was the warning my father had ignored. My grandmother gave me the letter. "Do what you will with it," she said. "Maybe it'll remind him who he used to be. Or maybe it'll just remind you who you are." That night, I wrote a response to the lawyer. "Per your letter dated Ixum, I am not liable for the deposit paid by Mr. Dad's name." As the contractual agreement was not entered into by mutual consent, nor was there a shared understanding of financial responsibility. Please consider this my formal statement declining payment. Further legal contact can be directed to my attorney. Then I attached a copy of the letter from my grandfather, and blind carbon copied every family member who had been guilt-tripping me. The response: silence. For 2 weeks. Until one morning, a new headline appeared on the same wedding blog that had featured our ceremony. "Daughter goes viral after shunning controlling father in powerful wedding statement." Apparently, a guest had shared a snippet of my emailed letter with the blog, and it struck a chord with thousands. The quote that got shared the most: "Control only works if you play along, and I'm done playing." It blew up. TikTok videos, reaction reels, people stitching the quote with their own stories of escaping controlling families. The narrative had flipped. I wasn't the villain anymore. I was the girl who walked away. And that finally is when karma came for my father. His business, a small consulting firm built on reputation and polished image, started losing clients. Quietly at first, then more obviously. One of his biggest contracts backed out, citing public scrutiny and values misalignment. I didn't gloat. I didn't post anything. I didn't even reply to the texts he eventually sent. Dad, you've ruined me. Dad, all for a wedding. Dad, I hope it was worth it. I read them all, and I deleted every one, because it wasn't about the wedding. It never had been. It was about finally standing up and saying enough. The old Vanessa would have crumbled, apologized, tried to make peace. But the woman who stood under that oak tree with the love of her life, she was done apologizing for growing up. She was done being manipulated by a man who loved power more than people. And she was done letting anyone else define what her happy ending should look like. A few weeks after the story blew up, I got a letter. Not an email, not a text. A real physical letter in a cream-colored envelope with handwriting I hadn't seen in years. It was from my dad. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Vanessa, I never expected you to cut me out. I thought you'd always forgive, always come back. That was selfish of me. I see that now. I don't know if this letter makes any difference. Maybe it's too late, but I want you to know you were right to walk away. And I hope your marriage is everything mine wasn't, Dad. I folded the letter carefully, put it back in the envelope, and tucked it in a drawer, not to forget it, but to remember how far I'd come. Because closure isn't always about apologies. Sometimes it's about realizing you don't need them. My wedding wasn't the one I planned at first, but it turned out to be exactly what I needed. A quiet celebration of love surrounded by the people who truly supported me. No pretense, no pressure, just presence. Now, when I look at the photos hanging in our hallway, I don't see what was missing. I see what was real. The way Aiden looked at me, the way my mom cried during the vows, the laughter, the light, the truth of that moment. I may have lost a father in the process, but I gained something deeper. Peace, boundaries, and the courage to choose myself. And if you ask me today if it was worth it, I'd smile and say every single second.